The scent of damp earth and blooming hydrangeas usually filled my mornings here in Willow Creek, Oregon, a comforting balm against the hurried pace of the outside world. For 56 years, I, Meredith Holloway, had cultivated not just my prize-winning roses, but a life of quiet predictability within these rolling hills. My home, a sturdy, cedar-shingled house perched on a gentle slope, had been my sanctuary, a place where the loudest sound was often the distant chirping of crickets or the gentle rustle of wind through the tall pines. I was an observant woman, one who noticed the way the light shifted through the firs at dawn, or the particular tune the Stellar's jays sang when a storm was approaching. I was resourceful, too, in a quiet way, always finding a solution for a wilting plant or a leaky faucet, preferring to mend rather than replace. And I was steadfast, rooted firmly in my routines, in my values, in my belief that a community thrived on respect and quiet understanding. But the peace had been fractured not by nature's caprice but by something far more insidious, the sheer, unadulterated aggression of my neighbors, the Millers, who lived in the newly constructed duplex just below my property line. I'd watched them move in nearly 5 years ago, a boisterous family with a perpetually scowling patriarch, Mr. Miller, whose presence seemed to ripple outwards, disturbing the very air. In the beginning, it was just minor irritations: loud music at odd hours, children's toys left strewn across the common sidewalk, the occasional bark of a dog that never seemed to tire. I'd seen it unfold before with other neighbors who had dared to live next to them. A new family would move into the other half of the duplex or into one of the smaller homes dotting our little cul-de-sac, full of hope and naive cheer. Then, slowly but surely, the Millers would begin their campaign of petty tyranny. I'd witnessed their aggressive outbursts towards the young couple who tried to plant a small garden, the elderly gentleman whose delivery truck briefly blocked their driveway, the single mother whose toddler's bicycle accidentally scraped their fence. Each time, the targets, weary and defeated, eventually moved away, leaving behind a subtle scar on our community. My steadfast nature had led me to hold my tongue, hoping, foolishly perhaps, that the problem would resolve itself, that the Millers would exhaust themselves or simply move on. But they never did, and my desire to restore peace and order, to see my beloved Willow Creek community once again flourish without this blight, had been growing, a seed of resolve slowly taking root within me. I just needed a catalyst, an undeniable reason to break my silence. That catalyst arrived on a late Friday afternoon, cloaked in a shroud of bewilderment. I was pruning my climbing roses near the property line, enjoying the last rays of sunlight, when I saw a young woman, Sarah, return home to the other half of the duplex. She was new, only having moved in with her partner, Mark, a few weeks prior. They seemed like good, quiet people, the kind who waved when you passed and kept their small patch of grass neatly trimmed. I'd felt a pang of protectiveness for them, knowing what usually came next. Sarah pulled her car into the driveway, got out, and then stood by her front door, a puzzled frown creasing her brow. I watched as she pulled out her phone, speaking animatedly, gesturing towards the house. A few moments later, I saw her walk around the side of the duplex, towards the meter panel located on the Miller's side. It was a new construction, I knew, built to updated electrical codes with an outside disconnect. From my vantage point, I couldn't see the panel itself, but I could infer she was clearly having a problem. Then, a few minutes later, another neighbor, Mr. Henderson from across the street, a kindly man with a perpetually furrowed brow, ambled over. He exchanged a few words with Sarah, then bent down, and with a grunt, I saw him make a distinct motion with his arm, as if flipping a switch. He gave Sarah a reassuring nod, and she went back inside. A moment later, I heard the faint hum of air conditioning from their unit, a sound that had been absent before. Power issue, I deduced. Annoying, but sometimes these new systems had quirks. I shrugged, dismissing it, returning to my roses, but an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. I had seen the Millers' children play around that meter box often. It was not a place one usually lingered. The next day, Saturday, the peculiar incident resurfaced, this time with a far more unsettling edge. I had taken my car to town for groceries, and when I returned, it was well past dark. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed the young couple's side of the duplex was dark again. No lights in the windows, no soft glow from their smart home devices I'd often observed through their large living room window. My initial thought was they must be out, but something felt off. Then I saw Mark, the young man, his shoulders slumped, his face illuminated by the harsh beam of a flashlight, walking slowly towards the meter panel again. He bent down, fiddled with something for a long moment, and then I heard a distinct click, followed by the immediate, almost defiant, flood of light that burst forth from the duplex windows. He stood up, his posture rigid, and then inexplicably he pulled something from his pocket. A padlock. He secured it to the meter panel door, the metallic clink echoing faintly in the quiet night. My breath hitched. A padlock on a shared utility box. This wasn't a trip breaker, this was deliberate. A cold knot of certainty tightened in my stomach. There was only one family who regularly walked that path, whose children played near that box, whose entire existence seemed centered on controlling their immediate surroundings. The Millers. This was the catalyst. This specific, insidious act against Sarah and Mark, new residents seeking quiet, was the final straw. my deep-seated desire to restore peace and order to my community, that long-simmering motivation now ignited into a burning resolve. I knew with absolute certainty that I could no longer remain a quiet observer. This was my moment to step up, to become the strategic ally I was meant to be, to finally put an end to this reign of low-grade terror. What exactly that would entail, I didn't yet know, but I knew I was ready. Just 5 minutes later, before I even had time to fully process what I'd witnessed, the night was ripped open by a harsh, insistent knocking. It wasn't at my door, but at Sarah and Mark's. I peered through my living room window, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It was Mr. Miller. His silhouette, already imposing, seemed to swell with outrage. Even from my distance, I could feel the fury radiating from him. He stood on their doorstep, legs braced, hands on his hips, his head cocked aggressively. I strained to hear, but the specific words were lost in the night. Still, the intent was unmistakable. His body language screamed accusation. Then the door opened and Mark stood there, illuminated by the porch light, his expression a mixture of fatigue and dawning realization. Mr. Miller's voice, though muffled, was now laced with a dangerous edge, rising in volume. I caught fragmented phrases. "What are you doing over on my property?" And "trespassing." My blood ran cold. His property. The meter panel was a shared utility access point, clearly not solely his. The audacity, the sheer nerve of the man was breathtaking. Mark, bless his calm demeanor, seemed to offer a quiet explanation, but it only served to inflame Miller further. His voice became a guttural roar, filled with indignation and a terrifying lack of self-awareness. I watched as Mark, a picture of restraint, simply closed his door. It wasn't a slam, but a firm, decisive click that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. The quiet, however, was fleeting. 10 minutes later, the blue and red lights of a patrol car sliced through the darkness, painting the houses in garish, shifting hues. 2 officers emerged, their uniforms crisp, their faces grim. Mr. Miller, astonishingly, was the one who had called them. The man who had been screaming at his new neighbors, now screaming at the very authorities he had summoned. He launched into a tirade, gesturing wildly, pointing at Sarah and Mark's side of the duplex, then at the meter panel, then back at the officers themselves, as if they were complicit in some grand conspiracy against him. His words, though still indistinct, seemed to demand Mark's immediate arrest for trespassing. The officers, remarkably stoic, simply listened, occasionally nodding with a practiced weariness. I could practically read their thoughts. Here we go again. I had seen them here before, a few years back, when the Millers had gotten into a dispute with the previous duplex residents over a shared fence. The police often left looking defeated. Then, just as the officers were finally approaching Sarah and Mark's door, another set of flashing lights joined the chaotic symphony, this time an ambulance. My hand flew to my mouth. What now? The paramedics, moving with urgent efficiency, made their way directly into the Millers' side of the duplex. A few moments later they re-emerged, supporting a woman, Mrs. Miller, her face ashen, her breathing shallow and ragged. She looked utterly distraught, verging on collapse. A panic attack, I realized. The stress, the sheer emotional volatility of her husband had finally pushed her over the edge. They gently guided her into the ambulance, and it sped away, its siren a mournful wail in the night. The police finally talked to Mark and Sarah, who, I was sure, explained the situation with calm and logic. I could see the officers' shoulders slump, a clear sign they were already familiar with the Millers' antics. From what I could gather through my keen observational skills and a little bit of strategic eavesdropping later, a habit I had perfected over the years, born of necessity when living next to the Millers, the officers had basically told Mark and Sarah that Miller was a dipshit they dealt with often and suggested they pursue a restraining order. It was a familiar refrain. The police left, their departure marked by the diminishing glow of their tail lights. Nothing happened. No arrests, no peace. Just the oppressive silence of a neighborhood holding its breath, followed by the faint, muffled sounds of Mr. Miller still arguing, loudly and aggressively, with what I assumed were his children for the next couple of hours. Another insane event indeed. For me, however, it was the definitive turning point. The kind of incident that makes you realize you can't just watch anymore. This had to stop. The next morning, the heavy shroud of tension still hung over Willow Creek. The air itself seemed thick with unspoken frustration. I brewed a pot of strong coffee, the aroma usually a comfort, but today it tasted bitter. My mind was reeling. I had always been steadfast, yes, but quietly so, a background presence. Now my motivation, that deep-seated desire to restore peace to my community, demanded a new kind of steadfastness, one that required active engagement. My role as a long-time, quiet resident who could become an unexpected, strategic ally to these new victims was staring me in the face. This was it. I decided my first step was to approach Sarah and Mark directly. I knew it wouldn't be easy for them to trust a neighbor who had, until now, remained a silent observer of their plight. But I needed to offer more than just sympathy. I needed to offer solutions, resources, and a strategic mind honed by decades of living in this very neighborhood. After my second cup of coffee, I put on my sensible walking shoes and headed down the slight incline towards their duplex. My heart hammered with a nervous energy I hadn't felt in years, but beneath it, a quiet determination pulsed. Sarah answered the door, her eyes red-rimmed, her face pale. Mark was behind her, leaning against the doorframe, a weariness etched onto his features that belied his young age. "Meredith, isn't it?" Sarah asked, her voice raspy. "Yes, dear, Meredith Holloway." "Live just up the hill," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm and reassuring. "I saw what happened last night and the day before. I've been living here a long time and I've seen this pattern before with the Millers." Their eyes met mine, a flicker of surprise, then something akin to weary resignation. "It's been a nightmare," Mark said, running a hand through his hair. "We just moved here, barely unpacked, and already this." "I know," I said, stepping forward slightly, maintaining a respectful distance. "And it's not right. They've driven away every other family who's lived in your unit and several others besides. I'm here because I believe we can change that, but it's going to take effort and it's going to take strategy." My observant nature told me they were skeptical but desperate. My resourceful side was already bubbling with ideas. We sat down at their small kitchen table, and I listened as they recounted their harrowing experience in detail. The smart collar notification, the discovery of the manually flipped breaker, the aggressive confrontation, the police, the ambulance. They were exhausted, mentally and emotionally drained. The police said to get a restraining order, Sarah sighed, picking at a loose thread on the tablecloth. "But what good would that do? He lives next door, and it feels like such an escalation." "It is an escalation," I agreed, "but sometimes, dear, escalation is what's required when you're dealing with someone who understands no other language. However, a restraining order is just one tool in the toolbox. We need a bigger toolbox, and we need to build a case that's irrefutable." I explained my plan for meticulous documentation. "You need a log every single incident, no matter how small. Date, time, what happened, who witnessed it. Keep it factual, unemotional. This is not for venting, it's for evidence." My steadfastness was evident in the methodical approach I proposed. "And cameras, not just a doorbell camera, something pointed directly at that meter panel and perhaps a wider view of the shared property line. High definition, time-stamped, audio if possible, though that's trickier with privacy laws." Mark's eyes widened slightly. "We were thinking about a camera for the meter, but where would we even put it? And it feels so invasive." "Less invasive than having your power cut off," I stated gently but firmly. "We can discuss placement. I've observed their patterns for years. I know their blind spots, their routines. My observational skills were already at work. We also need to look into the homeowners association bylaws if there are any that apply to duplexes or local ordinances. Noise, property maintenance, harassment, every little piece of information can be useful." They looked overwhelmed, but also a tiny spark of hope flickered in their eyes. For the first time, they weren't alone. Over the next few weeks, the situation predictably escalated. The Millers, perhaps sensing the shift in Sarah and Mark's demeanor or simply infuriated by the padlock on the meter box, became bolder. The music from their side of the duplex, previously just loud, now thumped with an oppressive bass that vibrated through Sarah and Mark's walls, often late into the night. It wasn't just occasional, it was a nightly assault. Sarah, who worked remotely, found it impossible to concentrate. Mark, a shift worker, couldn't get proper rest. I felt a surge of sympathy and frustration for them. One morning, Sarah discovered her prized rose bush, a gift from her grandmother, had been savagely pruned, not with care, but hacked at, its blossoms scattered like a cruel confetti across her small lawn. Then their mail was mysteriously soaked, as if someone had left it out in the rain, despite clear skies. And the dog waste, previously confined to their own yard, now appeared frequently on Sarah and Mark's side of the property line, strategically placed near their back door. It was petty, vindictive, and undeniably designed to provoke. Each incident was meticulously logged, photographed, and time-stamped. Mark, following my advice, had installed a discreet, weatherproof camera on the side of his house, cleverly angled to capture the meter box and a good portion of the shared path. It was an investment, but a necessary one. My resourcefulness was put to the test. I helped them research noise ordinances, finding the exact decibel limits in quiet hours. I even purchased a decibel meter for them to use. We discovered that while there wasn't a formal homeowners association, our small cluster of homes was subject to specific county zoning and nuisance codes. I helped them draft formal letters, polite but firm, addressed to the Millers, detailing the nuisances and requesting abatement. Of course, these letters, when ignored, or worse, met with intensified harassment. Mr. Miller would stand in his yard, staring malevolently at Sarah and Mark whenever they were outside, sometimes muttering under his breath, just loud enough for them to hear veiled threats. "Some people don't know how to mind their own business," he'd snarl, his eyes darting towards their surveillance camera. We tried contacting the non-emergency police line again. Each time, an officer would come listen and then advise them to get more evidence or pursue civil action. They were sympathetic but ineffective. The frustration was palpable, a heavy weight that pressed down on all of us. Sarah and Mark were losing sleep, their tempers frayed. They started to look as exhausted as the previous residents had. I felt their despair, and it ignited my own outrage. This wasn't just about them anymore, it was about the very fabric of our community. My motivation to restore peace was becoming an obsession. One particularly bad night, the Millers hosted an outdoor party that blasted music until nearly 3 a.m. The bass pounded so hard it rattled the windows in my own home, a good 100 feet away. I called the police myself this time, adding my own complaint to Sarah and Mark S. An officer arrived, spoke to the Millers, and the music volume dropped for about 20 minutes, only to surge back up after the patrol car left. It was a deliberate taunt. The next day, Mark reviewed the camera footage from the night before, and there it was. Not just the music, but Mr. Miller himself at exactly 2:47 a.m., clearly visible in the camera's night vision, walking stealthily to the meter panel, a grim smile on his face and flipping their breaker off. Again, he lingered for a moment, looking directly at the camera, then laughed, a low, chilling sound, before turning and going back inside. It was a brazen act meant to show them he was in control, that nothing they did would stop him. Sarah burst into tears when she saw it. "He's mocking us, Meredith," she choked out, wiping at her eyes. He knows we're trying to stop him, and he just doesn't care. We can't live like this, we're losing our minds." Her despair was thick in the air, a physical weight. My heart ached for them. This was their rock bottom. They were ready to give up. This pushed me to my own emotional precipice. Intense anger coursed through me, hot and unforgiving. The audacity of this man, the endless torment, the way he systematically chipped away at the lives of good, innocent people. My steadfastness was tested, but it held. If anything, it solidified. I was not going to let him win, not this time. "Subscribe to Neighbours From Hell channel for new Neighbours From Hell stories daily," I murmured to myself, a subconscious thought escaping my lips as I reviewed the footage with them. This was the kind of story that truly belonged on such a channel. It wasn't just a nuisance, it was a slow, agonizing psychological warfare, and I, Meredith Holloway, was about to launch a counteroffensive. My role as a strategic ally was no longer a suggestion, it was a necessity. I knew I couldn't just advise them anymore, I had to lead them. The time for quiet observation was over. The time for calculated action had begun. The raw footage of Mr. Miller's contemptuous laugh as he flipped their power off was the catalyst I needed to transition from advising to actively strategizing. The despair in Sarah and Mark's eyes was a mirror of the outrage simmering within me. They were at their rock bottom, but I, Meredith Holloway, was just beginning to rise. My motivation, that deep, unyielding desire to restore peace to Willow Creek, propelled me forward. My years of quiet observation, my inherent resourcefulness, and my unwavering steadfastness were about to be weaponized. This wasn't just about Sarah and Mark anymore. It was about every neighbor the Millers had terrorized, every quiet life they had disrupted. "We have them," I said, my voice low but firm, holding up Mark's phone with the incriminating video. "This is undeniable proof, but the police have already shown us they are limited in what they can do. We need to go higher. You need to hit them where it hurts and in a way that creates a permanent solution." My mind raced, connecting dots, recalling snippets of information I'd gathered over the years. My plan would be meticulous, legal, and utterly devastating to the Millers. It wouldn't be swift, but it would be final. My first step was to broaden our alliance. I thought of Mrs. Petrov, the elderly woman whose rose bushes had been repeatedly trampled by the Miller children, and whose fence had been suspiciously damaged. I thought of the young couple, the Johnsons, who had moved away in tears after countless noise complaints and what they suspected was deliberate tampering with their sprinkler system. I knew they all harbored similar resentments, similar desires for peace. I called Mrs. Petrov first. She was hesitant, wary of the Millers' known aggression. But when I explained our solid evidence, the video, her eyes gleamed with a fragile hope. "Meredith, dear, are you sure this won't just make things worse?" she asked, clutching a teacup in her trembling hands. "It will get worse before it gets better, Mrs. Petrov," I admitted, "but for the first time we have undeniable proof, we have a shared purpose, we have a strategy, and we have strength in numbers." My steadfast conviction seemed to resonate with her. She agreed to contribute her own detailed logs of incidents, painstakingly kept over the years, though she had never acted on them. Over the next few days, I systematically reached out to other former and current neighbors, discreetly and cautiously. It was like building a quiet, determined army, one weary resident at a time. My role as a strategic ally grew with each conversation. Most were skeptical at first, but when I showed them the video of Mr. Miller, their skepticism turned into quiet fury. The universal frustration with the problematic neighbor, the helplessness, the longing for order, it all coalesced into a potent, shared desire for justice. I explained that we wouldn't be confronting the Millers directly, not yet. Our power lay in the accumulation of undeniable, irrefutable evidence presented to the correct authorities. Our primary target, beyond the general harassment, was the repeated power tampering. It was dangerous, potentially destructive, and a clear violation of electrical codes and public safety. My resourcefulness led me to contact the local utility company, not with a complaint, but with an inquiry about the safety of shared outdoor electrical disconnects and the regulations surrounding their access. I spoke to a surprisingly helpful representative who explained that such boxes, while often accessible, should never be tampered with by unauthorized individuals, and repeated incidents could warrant an investigation by their safety department. This was a critical piece of information. The next phase involved a lawyer specializing in property law and civil disputes. It was an expensive step, but I convinced Sarah and Mark and even Mrs. Petrov to pool resources for an initial consultation. The lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Thorne, reviewed our meticulously compiled logs, the photographs, the shocking video of Mr. Miller. Her expression hardened with each piece of evidence. "This is not just a nuisance case," she stated, her voice crisp. "This is harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and potential property damage. The power tampering specifically is a serious safety violation. This could even be considered felony tampering with utility services in some jurisdictions. That video is golden." She outlined a multi-pronged approach. 1. Cease and desist letter, a formal legal letter not from Sarah and Mark but from Ms. Thorne, demanding the Millers stop all harassing behavior including power tampering, noise, and property damage, citing specific incidents and attached evidence. This would put them on legal notice too. Utility company report, a formal report to the utility company's safety division, complete with the video evidence and logs detailing the repeated, intentional power cuts. This could trigger their own investigation and potentially lead to the meter being moved or secured more robustly by the utility itself. 3. Restraining order revisit, a reevaluation of the restraining order, but this time with a stronger case, emphasizing the pattern of harassment and the safety implications of the power tampering. 4. Community impact statement, a collection of statements from other neighbors like Mrs. Petrov, detailing their own experiences with the Millers. While not direct evidence for Sarah and Mark's case, it would paint a clear picture of a pattern of behavior and underscore the Millers' negative impact on the entire community. This was where my long-term observations and current alliances would truly pay off. The day the cease and desist letter arrived at the Millers' door, delivered by certified mail, was strangely quiet. Too quiet. My observational instincts told me this was the calm before the storm. Mr. Miller was surely seething, his rage stewing. Sarah and Mark had installed additional security features, reinforced their locks, and kept the cameras rolling constantly. The storm broke 2 days later. The Millers' music became an almost constant barrage during waking hours, defying the quiet hours, testing the decibel limits. Mr. Miller took to parking his car half in Sarah and Mark's driveway, blocking their access. And one afternoon, the ultimate provocation. He placed a large, overflowing trash can, filled with what looked like rotting food, directly against the common wall of the duplex, near Sarah's open window, attracting flies and emitting a truly vile stench. He even had the audacity to lean out his window, watching Sarah gag, and let out a triumphant, sneering laugh. My anger flared, hot and intense. This man truly had no limits. This was a clear violation of city health codes, not just a nuisance. I immediately had Sarah photograph it, then call the city's code enforcement. This wasn't a police matter, but a municipal one, hitting a different nerve. This was the meticulous execution, leveraging every available avenue. Then came the utility company's response. They took the power tampering incredibly seriously. After reviewing the video evidence and Sarah and Mark's detailed logs, they dispatched their own investigators. The Millers were slapped with a hefty fine for unsafe tampering with electrical equipment, and a formal warning that any further incidents could result in service disconnection. More importantly, the utility company announced that, due to the repeated hazardous tampering and the demonstrated inability of the residents to coexist peacefully regarding shared utilities, they would be installing a new tamper-proof meter box, secured with a special lock only accessible by utility personnel. This was a grand payoff, a direct victory in one of the most stressful aspects of the conflict. The meter box, that source of so much grief, would finally be out of Mr. Miller's reach. The news hit the Millers like a freight train. Mr. Miller ranted and raved, accusing the utility company of bias, accusing Sarah and Mark of malicious lies. He tried to argue with the utility workers as they installed the new, formidable metal box, but they were unyielding, backed by legal authority. His face was purple with rage. He looked directly at my house, at Sarah and Mark's, a venomous glare that promised retribution. I knew he felt cornered, and cornered animals were dangerous. The final, decisive action involved the accumulated evidence. With Ms. Thorne's guidance, we filed a comprehensive civil lawsuit, not just for a restraining order but for damages, emotional distress, lost wages due to sleep deprivation, property damage, the roses, the mail, and the significant legal fees incurred. We included the statements from Mrs. Petrov and other neighbors, illustrating the Millers' long-standing pattern of disruptive and aggressive behavior. We also attached the utility company's official findings and the fines levied. It was a thick dossier, undeniable and damning. The lawsuit landed like a bombshell. Mr. Miller's usual bluster was met with the cold, hard reality of legal process. He hired his own lawyer, but our case was airtight. The video of him cutting the power, the health code violation with the trash, the sheer volume of documented incidents, corroborated by multiple witnesses, it was overwhelming. The climax arrived during the mandatory mediation session. Mr. Miller, clearly uncomfortable in the formal setting, fidgeted and scowled. He tried to spin tales to blame Sarah and Mark to dismiss everything as neighborly disagreements. But Ms. Thorne, armed with our evidence, systematically dismantled his every claim. She played the video, she presented the city's health code findings, she laid out the financial damages, the emotional toll. She even brought in Mrs. Petrov, who, with surprising clarity and resolve, recounted years of petty harassments. Mr. Miller looked increasingly desperate, his bluster giving way to a pale, clammy fear. Then Ms. Thorne dropped the final hammer. Given the documented pattern of harassment, the safety violations, and the significant distress caused, my clients are not only seeking financial compensation but also a permanent injunction requiring the Millers to sell their property within 6 months and vacate the premises. Mr. Miller gasped. His face went from purple to ashen. His lawyer looked stunned. The silence in the room was deafening. This wasn't just about a fine or a restraining order. This was about their home. This was about dislodging them permanently from Willow Creek. This was my strategic plan, meticulously executed, brought to its devastating fruition. My steadfastness had paid off. The triumph, the sheer, profound relief washed over me. For the first time in years, I felt a lightness in my chest. This was it. This was the grand payoff. The Millers, facing an insurmountable legal battle and the very real threat of public humiliation if the case went to trial, capitulated. They agreed to an out-of-court settlement. The terms were simple and non-negotiable. They would sell their duplex within 6 months and move. They would also pay a substantial sum for damages and legal fees, ensuring Sarah and Mark were made whole, and then some. The permanent injunction, which would prevent them from ever owning property again in our immediate area, ensured our peace would not be temporary. The disruptive behavior would cease permanently. The day the for sale sign went up on the Millers' property was one of quiet celebration in Willow Creek. Sarah and Mark embraced me on their porch, tears of gratitude in their eyes. They could finally sleep soundly, work in peace, and feel safe in their own home. Mrs. Petrov brought me a fresh-baked apple pie, her smile broader than I had ever seen it. The entire neighborhood seemed to collectively exhale, a palpable lifting of a dark cloud that had hung over us for far too long. Peace I had so deeply desired, that central motivation for my journey, had been restored, not just for myself but for the entire community. It was a profound satisfaction, a vindication of perseverance and strategic thinking. My role as the unexpected strategic ally had been fulfilled. The Millers moved out exactly 5 months and 28 days later, 2 days before the deadline. Mr. Miller, his usual swagger replaced by a defeated slump, barely made eye contact with anyone. As their moving truck pulled away, a final, surprising twist unfolded. An older woman, frail and stooped, emerged from their side of the duplex. She was Mrs. Miller's mother, I later learned, who had been living with them in secret, perpetually ill and confined to a back room. As she was gently helped into a taxi, she caught my eye. Her gaze was soft, filled with a profound sadness. "He was always so angry," she whispered, her voice barely audible, gesturing back at the now empty house. "Ever since the accident, he never grieved right, he just built a wall of rage." Then, with a shudder, she added, "He thought turning off the power made him feel in control, like he could take something from others because so much had been taken from him." She didn't elaborate, and the taxi drove away, leaving behind a lingering thought about the complex, often hidden, roots of human cruelty and the profound impact of unresolved trauma. It didn't excuse their behavior, not one bit, but it added a layer of human tragedy to the narrative of my neighborhood's long suffering. The new family who moved into the duplex a few weeks later was a young couple with 2 small children, full of joyful noise and friendly smiles. The sounds of children's laughter, the genuine kind, now filled the air instead of pounding bass. My hydrangeas continued to bloom, and the quiet comfort of Willow Creek, Oregon, had truly returned. The path to peace had been long, fraught with frustration and moments of utter despair, but my steadfastness, my resourcefulness, and my observant nature had finally brought order back to our little corner of the world. And as I tended my roses, the scent of damp earth once again a comforting balm, I thought about all the stories still out there, all the communities longing for peace. Subscribe to Neighbours From Hell channel for new Neighbours From Hell stories daily.